Ladies and gentlemen, what did you think of 13 Lives? My name is Scott Mantz. I was here a couple weeks ago for another screening, and I saw they were doing a double feature of 13 Lives and Apollo 13 with the filmmakers in between. And I literally begged the American Cinematheque to let me moderate. So here I am. Thank you, Chris, for having me be here. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage. Please welcome producer Karen Lunder. Award-winning producer Brian Grazer. And please welcome to the stage Academy Award-winning producer and director Ron Howard. They were doing this, I'm like, oh my God, this is absolutely a perfect double feature. And not just because 13 is in the title. So, but really, when I think about it, it's really there are so many parallels between these films. Like, what do you see, Ron? Start with you as the parallels between these movies.
Well, they're both really strictly procedural. In other words, they're very driven by the information, the facts, the details. Sure, there are some simplifications. You have to combine characters and try to compress it into a movie time frame. But in both instances, I remember writing on my script for Apollo 13, just show it. And so I tried. And similarly here, with one difference is that was about really professionals prevailing, to an awesome degree, whether they were on the ground in mission control or in space. And this was so much about volunteerism. And I felt like a real urgency to get involved in this because I just felt that, sort of what these people had actually given us in this, not only the rescue of these 12 boys and their coach, but also this object lesson in what volunteerism and cross-cultural cooperation could look like, how it worked, and how it undeniably did work. And I'm just going to say one story. The other thing is that the Apollo 13 was the first movie that I ever did based on real events. And in many years since, we've done a lot, also gotten into documentaries and so forth. But I was anxious because we'd done Splash and Parenthood and and comedies, and our creativity was fully engaged all the time. And I was concerned that that would be squelched by the reality. In fact, found it to be the opposite. And I also found that audiences really leaned in when they knew it was based on real events. And my first real insight was at a preview screening, our very first preview screening of Apollo 13. And this was an era when they didn't really tell the audience what they were seeing. So there was no publicity, no sense of it. It was just an audience, and they were invited in to see a movie, and they came in, and it was Apollo 13, and we screened it. It was very rough, first screening. Still some storyboards in, where our effect shots weren't finished and things like that. But it tested tremendous. It was just great. And so we were all elated. Now, even though by then I was already a Final Cut director, I still cared a lot about the audience, and I would get these cards and read through them, to understand how people were responding to the movie. It was spectacular, except there was one poor. You rated excellent, very good, good, fair, poor. One poor. So that's the first one I had to find. Yeah. What's with the poor? Okay, so I'll never forget it. 23 years old, Caucasian, male. Poor. Would not recommend it. Not saying much. Really just bold strokes. Just negative. Finally on the back, there was a question that this viewer deigned to actually offer some insight. And it was, please comment and rate the resolution, the ending of the movie. Terrible. He wrote with an exclamation mark. More Hollywood bullshit! 2 exclamation marks. They would never survive! 3 exclamation marks. I realized he didn't know. He didn't know it was a true story. And I realized then and there that that's why you choose these outlier subjects, because they do prove the possibility of really remarkable outcomes and achievements. And so that's the other thing that I think these 2 movies have in common.
Unbelievable. I hope that 23-year-old person finally died. But with both of these films, tonally, both of these movies, Apollo 13 and 13 Lives, tonally they are very different. I mean, of course, Apollo 13 is a Hollywood film, and I mean that in a great way. It was nominated for Best Picture and everything. This movie feels a little more like procedural. So did all of the work that you have done since Apollo 13, especially with the documentary, sort of like make you lean into that style a little bit more?
Lean into the truth of it, you mean?
Yeah.
Lean into the factual nature of it? I don't know. I mean, I think that's a backdrop, of our understanding of film, and be able to prove and seeing these documentaries come to life that were really effective. And the truth has tremendous power. But I don't know if that is really what influenced that. But I do think that it has kind of a similar architectural narrative to it. And the way Ron was able to create tension is by cutting back and forth the way he did, say, it with mission control and the capsule in space. He was able to do something quite similar here, where you have the subjects or the survivors, their lives are at stake, and then you have our divers, and you're cutting back and forth not only from them to one another, but to the outside, so you get a sense of like what the tension is like globally in this situation. So I think that is one of the strong similarities for me.
Also, the events that depicted in 13 Lives are pretty recent, like 4 years ago. So Karen, my question is that because it is more recent, because it might be more well known, because of stuff like the internet, and also because you have a documentary that came out within the last year and a half that also depicted that same story. So what were sort of the challenges that you all went over to make this difference?
Yeah, well, by the way, the the rights to the documentary are the same rights as the film. We partnered with PJ Sandwick and Gabriel Tana, who had gone and gotten the rights to the 2 divers. And one of the very first things that we noticed when we read it was so incredibly centered on those 2. And we knew just from our own experience following it in real time that the story was much bigger than that. And so a big part of Ron's process, and I think Brian's process and the 2 of them together over the years, has been to really mine the story and dig deeper and find out what are all those human details, what are those aspects of the story that are not on CNN. And we discovered a lot of things that were really interesting very quickly, including things like the water guide, Tanette, we had no idea that they were draining the mountain. We had no idea that farmers were sacrificing their livelihoods for more than a year just to help something that might not actually work. I mean, it was a massive, massive sacrifice. And so there was a humanity in those stories. And as the more we learned, the more the script populated, and it ballooned from 105 pages to, 140. And then we just sort of drilled into what are the most important moments to keep in the movie.
There was another big difference also was the cultural specificity.
Yes.
And this was a challenge, a concern, and from the beginning we just talked about the necessity to really get that right and to solve that problem and prepare ourselves for that. And hence, co-producers, Thai co-producers. One's a writer, young writer-director. The other one's a writer-producer who came in initially really just to work on the translation. But quickly I realized they could really be allies, and they stayed with the film throughout. The young writer-director, I sort of put him in charge of the boys who had never acted. The reason we had the young guys had never acted before was because we needed to get the northern dialect, which is very specific and to the point where people from Bangkok can't necessarily understand it. It's quite extreme, and so much so that even in Thai cinema they don't always deal with it. But I really wanted to, and so the woman who played Bom Bom the mom, and also Kage who played the dad with the hat, they're from the north. They're actors, they're professionals, but they're from the north. But I knew there was going to be a lot of improvisation in the cave. I knew that dialogue had not been written, and the interaction between the boys was going to be improvised. And so we needed to get kids from the north, because you wouldn't be able to go through with a dialect coach and sort of monitor that. And so anyway, it was a really important exercise. Sayampu Muktipram, our cinematographer, of course, was he was my second hire on the film, and I was elated when he said yes. And I said, and by the way, here I am, this American mainstream filmmaker. I've got to get this right so that when it plays in Thailand, Sayampu, it's that people accept it. And he said, I will be your angel. And he really was, but they all were. And then I was able to really deputize the actors, because we had a lot of very experienced actors, as well. And when they began to trust that this was an environment, I was creating an environment where their contributions were vital and welcome. Again, our co-producers were able to keep reinforcing this and mining it for details and helping us, not step on cultural landmines. And I was thrilled by the way Thai audiences have responded to the film.
That was my question. What was the reaction that Thai audiences gave? Yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, you're watching this movie and you're seeing the scope of it, just the production of it, the diving scenes and the cast of literally thousands, it feels like. Brian, my question, with all of the films and all the projects that you produce, you're mounting something that I certainly never seen you do as a producer before, and you're doing it during peak COVID times. What were those challenges like for you?
Well, this is sort of an inside joke. Because during these peak COVID times, I wasn't actually at the location. So, I was part of the building of the movie, but I wasn't actually there, and nor was Karen, because we couldn't really even travel there. So
it was a huge lockdown situation. Normally I would have the screenwriter there the entire time. Bill Nicholson and I never met, and we didn't meet until post-production. And
this is how movies work, ladies and gentlemen.
because he would have to quarantine for 2 weeks to get into Australia, and we were scheduled to shoot. We wound up shooting a couple of weeks in Thailand. 1 week of a kind of beauty unit and another week of some scenes, which we kept pushing, hoping we could get there. And in fact, there was another spike just as we were wrapping our production in Queensland, Australia. And so Sayampu went home, and basically I wound up directing that stuff remotely, like on my phone.
I have to add something to that, though. What? This was before there were vaccines. So Ron and the entire crew were in Australia, which was one of the safest places in the world to be. And I remember Ron calling and saying, well, we're getting ready to go to Thailand. And I said, have you gotten your vaccine yet? And he said, no. And I said, you're not going to Thailand. Yeah, it was scary times.
It was a pretty intense period.
Yeah. So how do you actually direct unit remotely, especially with the attention to detail that you were talking about?
Well, in that case, that was put off till post-production, so there were only a handful of dialogue scenes. I had a chance to rehearse those scenes with the actors in Australia, knowing by then that there was a chance I wouldn't be able to get there. Sayampu was there, and it was literally me just, crazy hours with the system so that I literally was watching on my laptop and FaceTiming and saying, no, we need more coverage, and let's get to, try another one, and doing it. But they were, the actors were by then totally in command of their characters, and the scenes were fairly simple. Things in the rice fields, kids riding their bikes, the town, the scenes in the town. So there were only a handful of dialogue scenes.
So in terms of the set in Australia, the production design on the caves, how big was the set, and how did you, you're working with water, which is not exactly easy. Every director will tell you that. So talk about the production design and the building of the sets in the caves and everything.
Well, go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, well,
Try?
sure. So Molly Hughes is an incredible production designer who we had worked together with once before. She also was an art director before that, helped develop with Ron a system to build the caves. There were 9 chambers, and I think there was 5 tanks total, right? 2 sets running between main unit and second unit. And I don't know if this has been said to anybody yet, but as far as everything I could tell from all the dailies, all the phoning in, all of the conversations, Viggo and Colin, and therefore everybody else, all the actors, never got out of the water. They just worked straight through during the day. They
did all their
lunch and eat their sandwiches in their diving suits.
They did all their diving. So again, no real caves, all tanks, and 4 different cave systems. Molly would interface with the real divers, 2 of whom came to be our technical advisors. And when they dove the caves, they said it was uncanny how well she'd done. We built 3 caverns. One of them we used by shooting it in different directions and redressing it a little bit, we used it for 3 different intermediate caverns that were important. And then of course we had where the boys were and the opening, the cave opening. But once Viggo and Colin started training with Rick Stanton and Jason Mallison, Viggo came to me at one point and said, I've now learned how to do this, it's a part of the character. It's so specific. Frankly, I don't trust any stunt coordinator or stunt performer to actually do it as well as I think I can now do it, and I want to do it all. And I said, well, I appreciate your good intentions, and I just don't think it's practical. I'm not even sure it's safe. I've got to check. But from a production standpoint, we're not scheduled that way. We're having first unit and second unit running simultaneously. I have video links to both. Yes, we're staggering the days so that I can go there on Saturdays and whatnot. And he said, I'll do anything. He said, I'll waive turnarounds. I'll do anything. Colin, Joel, they all fell in line in that way. Weir, who played Saman, the Thai diver who passed, he's a great diver. Everybody was fully dedicated. Charlie Crowell, our second unit director and stunt coordinator, somebody I'd worked with before, is great at working with talent and confirmed that it was safe and that they were adept enough. And literally, they just made it possible, and it gave me so much freedom to stage shots. I thought we would just be cutting to close-ups, and it'd be doubles, and then you would cut to close-ups. And instead, we got to do these longer, lingering shots where it would be revealed over and over again that the actors were doing the diving. It was a little harder than I thought it was going to be, because I've done a lot of underwater stuff, going back to the 80s with Splash and Cocoon and things like that, and had a lot of success there, staying on schedule, getting a lot of good work done. But I did underestimate, just how the level of risk and the difficulty of actually working in these ultra confined spaces. The actors got to be so adept, in fact, that at a certain point we realized that certain shots were best operated by them. So we called them, we would do a selfie pass. And they would literally swim through and hold the little small unit, or one diver would follow the other and shoot a scene in places where our underwater team, which were spectacular, Simon Christides is one of the best in the world, but there were just so many places where you couldn't even get, a third person in there.
So I want to ask about the casting, like what made Colin Farrell and Viggo Mortensen and Joe Edgerton perfect for these roles?
Let's get to Apollo 13. What made them perfect? Their team. I mean, Ron should talk about this really because
But they're very. I mean, this was.
they're team players. You have to be a team player the same way they were in Apollo 13.
But you said something too. You said you got to get guys who are a little bit wild cards.
Yes.
Well, I mean, well, explain it. I mean, you didn't want people to look like they'd be.
Well, I want people to look real. I don't care if they're movie stars, actually. And in fact, there's other movies that we've done together where we thought, where the studio might have wanted a star, but I would always go for the person that ultimately had the most charisma, and the charisma that actually flowed through something that was quite authentic. So I think these three guys were very authentic, and ultimately that's what you want. You want people that are not aware of the camera, that aren't necessarily movie stars, even though the studio might have wanted movie stars. But I think you want people that you're going to believe. If they're not believable, then you're lost.
Totally.
And so that's ultimately where I come out on that.
So how many of you are watching the film, okay, and you're squirming in your seats because it is so friggin' claustrophobic, and you're like, oh my God.
If you lose anybody, generally,
So the question for you, Ron, is how did you capture that claustrophobia?
Well, actually, I had expected that we were going to build sets with open sections, and then digitally put the roof back in or something, and that's how we were going to do this. But as for cost reasons and also just the practicality of it, that's not ultimately what we did. So they really were tight spaces. And as I said, there were times when it was easier for the actors to just have to photograph themselves, or and again, the lion's share of it was Simon and a B camera getting in there. There were a few little. I designed some slits and little small portals to be able to get cameras in to certain passageways. But the reality was it was claustrophobic, and even though all the actors kept telling me every time I asked them, how you doing, is everything okay? And they all said, oh yeah, fine, and they weren't getting out of the tank. I mean, they were just killing themselves. Look, everybody killed themselves because, first of all, you had two of the divers there who had actually been through this event. And then and the Thai cast members who were there had not necessarily been there, but it was palpable, just the sense of responsibility of what had been achieved and trying to get that to be authentic. So I never had a production where people complained less. There was just no, and people just gave everything that they could to try to get this story right. And so it lent itself to this. Now, James Wilcox, the editor, and I spent a lot of time talking about the claustrophobia. Yeah, James did a spectacular job. He's a great editor. And we landed on the idea of really leaning in heavily into the point of view shots. Because to keep reminding you, and look, we did some things, like the first dive in is a little bit shot like a haunted house thing. So, it's kind of like what's around the corner, and should you go in that room, Ben Wallfish was great about sections with no music, and then coming in with the right thing, and then leaning into the sound design, which was spectacular. We wound up, Ben himself, Wallfish, said, look, this is sonically so powerful, I don't even want to get in here. I love what the sound team's done. So there was a lot of differentiating the dives, because there are 7 different dive sequences. And so for me and all of us, it was all about that. But we kept coming back to those POV shots to just keep trying to put the audience there and just let you know and feel just how tight, in fact, it was.
Unbelievable. I saw the movie 4 times, and I was like, oh my God, I can never do this. Karen, I want to ask you, Yeah, you were talking before, Ron, about how, like with Apollo 13, I mean, it was a collaboration, but it was among professionals, really. Whereas with Thailand, with this, there was so much of it was volunteers and everything. But it's like the needs of the few outweighed the needs of the many, and you have this miracle 13 times over. And I just made me think, like, especially to watch this movie now after everything that we went through these last 2.5 years, like just how we can do when we all just come together. I mean, what's your take on that?
But you look, I think that was the approach. To as much as what Rick and John did was stunning and not something I think that I could certainly ever see myself pushing myself to those kind of physical limits of what they did. But it wasn't just about them. It really was thousands of people, hundreds of people making food in monsoons, day in, day out, to feed all the volunteers that were there. The amount of people that lent whatever they had to this cause, and as the world gets ever darker and more complicated, there is something really uplifting in that. And I will say, when we screened the film for an audience for the first time, when we did a test screening with the good, excellent, fair, poor. And I went to the bathroom while the scores were getting tabulated. And I came out and I looked at the guy's thing over and I knew the movie was good. I wasn't foolish about the fact that we succeeded in the endeavor. But when I looked over his shoulder and I saw the numbers, I actually thought it was a mistake. I was like, is that just like the template for like the really off the charts movie? That can't be our movie. But it was, and in the focus group, and this was a little while ago. I don't know, when was that? Like in April of last year or something like that. Yeah. The reaction from everybody was just, oh my God, please get this movie into people's hands today. Like, people need to see this movie because it is so unbelievably profound to see this many people from this many parts of the world just being human beings. And very early on, I think that was one of our ways of describing it, was at the end of the day, when you look at weather and Mother Nature, whether that's personified in the goddess of the mountain or whatever it is for you and wherever you're from, we're all just little ants. And I think that was really part of what was so remarkable about it, was just so many people with one goal. It actually can make something good happen.
It was fascinating to work back to the Post and James Wilcox and the number of screenings leading up to that one, because we had a lot of small friends and family screenings. And this is very similar to Apollo 13 in this way, but you have to add that cultural component as well. And it was really interesting to just keep understanding the rhythm of it. And I was always trying to build the set of sequences that would have their own motor, their own beginning, middle, and end. But we kept coming back to the real heartbeat of it, which is a little bit what Brian was talking about earlier, with the who all is involved, even beyond the principals. And we kept finding ways to include that in sort of throughout. It was like a constant accent, and I felt like it was almost like conducting an orchestra in ways. It was like, well, bring in the parents. Let's remember the press, remember the media. How are people responding? And then
conducting an environment.
Yes, and it was trying to use that so that while even certain sequences were focused primarily on a dive, you still wanted to understand kind of what was at stake for everyone else. It was a very, look, Bill Nicholson did a great job on the script. We worked really hard on the research and kept advancing and deepening, and as we understood, and the actors all contributed, everyone did. But it really was on the post-production side, it was really finding the movie and honing it so that audiences from wherever could be really absorbed in the way this was unfolding, and not just the do or die of the kids in their life, but also just the emotional and psychological baggage that the characters were carrying with them.
And they unloaded that baggage at the very end of the film.
Yeah.
It really sticks to the land. Brian, I want to ask about some of the scenes that you worked on that were more challenging, the most challenging to fully realize, most challenging.
Well, that's going to be very hard. Which scenes I worked on, that would be, well, because I wasn't there and I didn't direct it, that's going to be challenging. But I would, what would you say, Ron?
Well, definitely I mean, look, the diving scenes were all challenging, but at a certain point we saw the footage and we just saw that was great. It really was about making sure that the Thai characters, kind of resonated with as much specificity as possible, and a range of performances, from people who were highly experienced and had done, had hundreds of credits, to the kids who had sort of, next to nothing in way of experience. So I think that was the challenge. But overall, it was balanced.
Yeah, the whole thing, I mean, for me, I mean, I see Ron over the 35 years we've worked together. He works so diligently at editing and refining the movie from screening to screening. I think on Night Shift, our first movie, he would do 2 screenings a week, didn't you?
Yeah, we did.
And so I often, when I see a first cut of, say, 13 Lives, I don't see the beauty that he sees. He has a vision about where he's gonna, what he wants it to be, but I don't. It's hard for me to navigate the direction of which way he's going to go to get there. So it's sometimes very difficult, but it's incredibly remarkable the difference in the feeling of a movie that Ron has directed from the first cut to what would be this final cut that you saw this evening.
Well, I love to use the screenings as a way to try to understand kind of what we have and what, and how that's resonating, how that's landing, and sort of. So I do start. Even though again I have the final cut, but I've always screened starting at a very early, clumsy, awkward place, and I'm willing to put people through that selfishly to try to understand what's already working. And what are the headlines? What are the takeaways? Because those have become the real building blocks. And also the question marks, because you're always surprised. I mean, it's a bummer. I talk about these screenings like I like them. I despise them. They're awful. Because they're humbling, and they're heartbreaking. But you begin to realize these are all communications, all of these stories. And so you begin to understand, what you thought you were communicating may or may not be landing, may not be, and you got to understand that sooner than later.
And on this movie, you're juggling more perspectives than any other movie I think you've really worked on.
I think that's true.
23-year-old Caucasian male, you'll never forget that. I want to ask, first of all, I just got to say, you brought up Night Shift, so I got to say, ladies and gentlemen, this year, 2022, is the 40th anniversary of their first movie, Night Shift. You all want to see love brokers, but I do want to ask,
we thought we were going to get fired.
this film, 13 Lives. I mean, it's on Amazon Prime, and even watching it at home, I had the same reaction I did when I was watching it on a big screen. Totally squirming in my seat. And I knew people who watched it for the first time on Amazon Prime and didn't get to see it on the big screen had the same reaction. But you talk a little bit about takeaway, and again, the fact that this is coming out now. What do you hope people take away?
Well, I do hope. Look, it's really the reason that I felt like this was an opportunity that so we didn't develop this. This script came to us. PJ Sandwick and Gabby, had undertaken it, So I really, I felt like cinematically it was going to be an interesting challenge for me. Culturally, I was very excited. I was also respectful and recognized the element of risk, but I really wanted to take on the challenge of trying to understand Thai culture well enough to convey it. But more than anything, I did feel like it was a movie for this moment, and I did feel that it's the reason everybody works so hard on the film. I wanted to build upon what these the gift that they had given the world, led by the Thai government. Let me just say, they made all of this possible without ever relinquishing leadership. They did a great job, and they didn't politicize it. They just said, "Let's do it. We just want to achieve it." With that kind of mentality, look what happened, and I wanted to share that. And I thought it was great that there were, there were multiple investors who were willing to make the movies, who were really able to find a great home for it. It started at MGM. Mike DeLuca and Pam Abdi bought the movie, or didn't buy it. They agreed to finance it. Then it was acquired by Amazon. Amazon has really loved the movie and poured a lot into it, and a lot of support. And so, I think it's worked out. It's worked out really well for us.
So just a couple quick announcements, folks. So if you could please stay seated while we exit this first. But more importantly, so now that you've seen the film, so it is streaming on Amazon Prime. So how do you spread the word about a movie? You, of course, go on social media. So go on Facebook, go on Instagram, go on Twitter. Don't go on Twitter. Go on MySpace, but ladies and gentlemen, please spread the word about Two Lives. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for coming.